Today we are going to be talking about Citizen Kane. It's 1941, and newspaper tycoon Charles Foster Kane is dead. The opening shots show Xanadu, Kane's vast, elaborate, and now unkempt estate in Florida. Interspersed with segments of his newsreel obituary are scenes from his life and death. Most puzzling are his last moments. Clutching a snow globe, he mutters the word Rosebud. Kane, whose life was news and whose newspapers not only reported but formed public opinion, was central to his time, a larger-than-life figure. The newsreel editor feels that until they know who or what Rosebud is, they won't have the whole story on Kane. He assigns a reporter called Thompson to investigate Rosebud. Thompson digs into Kane's life and hears a lot of stories, but none of them reveal the meaning of Rosebud. The reporter sees Susan Alexander Kane, the tycoon's ex-wife. She's drunk and won't speak to him. Then he reads the unpublished memoirs of Mr. Thatcher, Kane's early financial advisor and childhood guardian, who later became a prime target of the Kane newspaper's trust-busting attacks. In one of many flashbacks, the Thatcher memoir shows Kane's mother signing guardianship of the boy and his fortune over to Thatcher, despite his father's objections. When Charles objected violently to being sent away with Thatcher, Kane Sr. remarked, "What the kid needs is a good thrashing." Mrs. Kane responded, "That's why he's going to be brought up where you can't get at him." Some present-day fans of the film interpret this to mean that Mr. Kane was abusive. 1940s audiences were more likely to have believed that Mrs. Kane was overprotective, and that if Charles had been allowed to grow up enjoying the love and discipline of his parents, his life would have turned out better. Years later, as he was about to get control of his business affairs, Kane's interest in newspapers was piqued when he noticed that he owned the struggling New York Daily Enquirer. "Don't sell it," he famously wrote to Thatcher, "I think it would be fun to run a newspaper," a statement that exasperates Thatcher greatly. That exasperation grows even more when Kane's paper starts attacking Thatcher's traction interests as corrupt, and they suffer as a result. Thatcher confronted Kane at the Enquirer to talk him out of attacking businesses that Kane himself owns considerable stock in, as well as throwing so much money away on low-class journalism such as instigating the Spanish-American War. However, Kane defiantly told Thatcher that he wanted to use journalism to protect the interests of ordinary people from the likes of Thatcher, and intended to use his personal resources to keep the newspaper running at an annual $1 million loss for 60 years if necessary. The scene shifts to an office at a time considerably sooner than 60 years later, in which Kane's bankrupted media empire is placed under the control of Thatcher. Thatcher even-handedly noted that while Kane would still be richer than him, his former ward never made significant investments with his money, but instead squandered much of it in buying things. Kane ruefully speculated that if he had not been so rich, he might have become a great man to become everything Thatcher hates. Next, Thompson interviews Bernstein, the general manager of Kane's newspaper empire. In further flashbacks, Bernstein recalls how he, Kane, and Kane's college friend Jedediah Leland took over the stuffy, unprofitable Enquirer and transformed it into a moneymaker, eventually hiring the staff of the rival New York Chronicle. At Bernstein's urging, Thompson seeks out Leland, who recounts the story of Kane's first marriage and makes some negative comments about his one-time friend's character. "Charlie was never brutal, he just did brutal things. He married for love, that's why he did everything. That's why he went into politics. It seems we weren't enough. He wanted all the voters to love him, too. All he really wanted out of life was love. That's Charlie's story, it's the story of how he lost it. You see, he just didn't have any to give. He never believed in anything except Charlie Kane." Leland goes on to describe Kane's second marriage, to Susan Alexander. Kane started seeing her while he was still married to Emily, during his campaign for governor. He ran on an anti-corruption platform, promising to investigate and bring down his opponent, political boss Jim Geddes. Geddes found out about Susan and threatened to tell the press unless Kane withdrew from the race. Kane refused, the story came out, and he lost the election along with his first marriage. In the immediate aftermath of that defeat, Leland, drunkenly incensed at Kane humiliating his family and then treating the public's political rejection of him as if they were his serfs, asked to be transferred to the Chicago newspaper to get away from him. He married Susan soon after his divorce from Emily was final. Although her singing talent was modest, Kane was ambitious on his wife's behalf. He paid for voice lessons, built an opera house in Chicago, and financed an elaborate production for her debut. At the opening night performance, which was poorly received by the audience to the point where Kane is quickly left alone applauding his wife's performance, Kane arrived at the offices of the Chicago Enquirer to find Leland drunk again and passed out over his typewriter, his cheek resting on his unfinished, and very negative, review of Susan's performance. Kane finished the review in the same negative vein and ran it in all his papers, but fired Leland. Susan wanted to quit, but Kane insisted she keep performing until a suicide attempt convinced him she needed to give up singing. The couple moved to Florida and Kane went to work on Xanadu, where most of the remaining scenes are set. Kane's 49,000-acre private pleasure ground, ostensibly built for Susan, includes a man-made mountain, a golf course, vast gardens, a zoo, and, of course, a mansion. In a huge, echoing, and nearly empty stone hall, Susan did jigsaw puzzles and longed to be in New York. Kane declined to leave Xanadu, but did arrange an event he called a picnic, involving an overnight stay in the Everglades, a large animal spit roasted over a fire, richly furnished tents, musicians, and many guests. In their tent, Susan accused him of trying to buy love, despite never loving anyone but himself, and of never giving her anything that mattered. He slapped her. Shortly thereafter she left him. She almost wavered in her resolve to go when he begged her not to, saying she'd have everything her own way. However, he then turned the emphasis back on himself, saying, "You can't do this to me." At that, Susan angrily realized the inherent selfishness behind that statement and defiantly walked out on him. From the Kane's butler Raymond, Thompson hears how Kane trashed Susan's room after she left but stopped when he came across the snow globe, which we recognize from the deathbed scene. As Kane pocketed the snow globe, Raymond heard him say Rosebud. Raymond has no idea what it means. However, he tells Thompson that he was in the room to hear Kane say Rosebud again just before he died. In Xanadu's big stone hall, the reporters are getting ready to leave. The place is jammed with packing crates full of art and household goods, some valuable, some not. There's a shot of all the crates that's a clear ancestor of the warehouse shot at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Thompson explains to the other reporters that he never found the meaning of Rosebud, but that it doesn't matter. "I don't think it explains anything. I don't think any word explains a man's life." The camera pans across the crates and finds the sled that Kane played with in the scene where his parents turned him over to Thatcher. The word Rosebud is stenciled on it. In the final scene, men are tossing trash into an incinerator. Raymond says, "Throw the junk in, too," and in goes the sled Rosebud, probably the only thing that always stayed with Kane. He was a man who got everything and then again lost everything. Rosebud must have been something he lost or something he wanted but never got. The flames consume it. In an exterior shot, the camera pulls back from the smoking chimney to the chain-link fence with the no trespassing sign with which the movie opened, and then to Xanadu's K-gate. For indeed, Kane's whole life has been a cleverly sculptured lie. And since Kane is the personification of the mass media, this means that the film is, in large part, about media dishonesty. As Kane tells a reporter, "Don't believe everything you hear on the radio." Aptly ironic words from a producer of yellow journalism who then tells the reporter to read his newspaper instead. Just as his life has been a lie, so is Xanadu. The film makes explicit the name of the mansion as a reference to Coleridge's Kubla Khan by quoting its first two lines in the newsreel. Kubla Khan, if you will, decreed a stately pleasure dome in Florida, his failed attempt at building paradise on earth, a huge mansion on a tall mountain reaching into the sky, suggestive of Babel. He collected two of every animal on the earth to put in a zoo in Xanadu, suggestive of Noah's Ark, a symbolic attempt to bring man back from the sinful world and into Eden, part of his failed attempt at regaining paradise. Such extravagance reminds one of Michael Jackson's animal collections, an eccentricity only the rich can afford. Kane's whole life has been an attempt to regain the paradise he lost as a child, that of parental love. No animals, statues, or mansion can replace such a loss, though. He has no one, nothing to look up to. Rosebud, printed on his childhood sled, is an interesting choice of words. The sled glides on snow, whose coldness is suggestive of death and alienation, whereas the rosebud is suggestive of life and the warmth of human company. Therefore, a rosebud on top of death's coldness is symbolic of his wish to maintain life and love over death and alienation, the carefree life of childhood over the dead conformity of adulthood. In the scene of his childhood home in Colorado, young Charles is outside with his sled and throwing snowballs. Inside his home are his mother, Moorhead, his father, and Walter Parks Thatcher, who are discussing how the boy will inherit a huge fortune when he reaches 25 years of age, but he must immediately leave his parents to be taken care of by Thatcher until he comes of age and receives the money. A good example of the use of deep focus in Citizen Kane is this scene, in which Mr. Kane is arguing with Mrs. Kane and Thatcher over the boy's fate. All four characters, nearer and farther away on the screen, are equally in focus, suggesting what should be their equal importance. Since, however, the mining deed leading to the boy's future fortune is in his mother's name, the decision to give him over to Thatcher's guardianship is hers alone, raising her importance over that of the others. Bringing us to the end of the movie. Comment below what you think. If you haven't already, like and subscribe.